In a small, sleepy town nestled in the heart of the Midwest, life moved at a slow and predictable pace. The streets were lined with quaint little shops, family-owned businesses, and cozy homes where neighbors knew each other by name. Among these establishments stood Marlene's Corner, a modest diner run by a woman whose spirit was anything but ordinary. Marlene Johnson, a tall, strong-willed woman in her late 40s, had inherited the diner from her mother years ago. It wasn't just a place to grab a meal, it was a hub for the community where people gathered to share stories, laughter, and sometimes even tears. Marlene was known far and wide for her no-nonsense attitude, quick wit, and unshakable sense of fairness. She wasn't one to shy away from speaking her mind, especially when she believed something was wrong. Over the years, this trait had earned her both admiration and occasional friction with authority figures. But Marlene didn't care much about what others thought. She lived by her own moral compass, which always pointed toward doing what was right. On a chilly autumn evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, Marlene was busy closing up the diner after another long day. The air smelled faintly of fried food and freshly brewed coffee, mingling with the crisp scent of fall leaves. As she wiped down the last table and turned off the neon open sign hanging in the window, an unexpected commotion broke the quiet serenity of the evening. Outside, voices grew louder, sharp and urgent. Curiosity tugged at Marlene, and she stepped out onto the sidewalk to see what was happening. What she saw stopped her in her tracks. A group of police officers had surrounded a man who looked like he belonged to another world entirely. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his weathered face framed by a thick beard. His leather jacket bore patches that identified him as part of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club, a name that carried weight, fear, and fascination wherever it went. The man, later introduced as Clayton Bear McAllister, stood calmly despite the tension crackling in the air. The officers accused him of causing trouble earlier at a nearby bar, claiming he'd been involved in a fight. Clayton denied the allegations, his voice steady but firm. Yet, the situation seemed to be escalating quickly. One officer raised his baton, his expression hard and unyielding, while another shouted orders, their tone leaving no room for negotiation. Marlene watched silently for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know Clayton personally, nor did she have any reason to trust someone associated with such a notorious group. But something about the scene unfolding before her eyes felt off. There was a disparity between the calm demeanor of the man and the aggressive posturing of the officers. It reminded her of moments in her own life when she'd felt powerless against those who wielded authority unfairly. Without giving herself time to second-guess her instincts, Marlene stepped forward. Her voice cut through the chaos like a knife, slicing through butter. "Leave him alone," she shouted, her words ringing out loud and clear. Every head turned toward her, including Clayton's, whose piercing blue eyes locked onto hers with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. "You're not beating on anyone tonight," she added, planting her feet firmly on the ground as if daring anyone to challenge her. For a brief moment there was silence. The officers hesitated, caught off guard by the sudden intervention of this fierce, middle-aged woman. Marlene didn't back down. Instead, she held her ground, her presence commanding respect. Sensing the shift in momentum, Clayton seized the opportunity to explain himself further. With Marlene's support, he managed to defuse the situation, convincing the officers to let him go without resorting to violence. As the crowd dispersed and the officers retreated, Marlene exhaled deeply, realizing only then how tightly her fists had been clenched. She glanced at Clayton, who nodded in acknowledgement. Though they hadn't exchanged more than a few words, a silent understanding passed between them, an understanding rooted in shared values of justice and integrity. Little did Marlene know, this seemingly random act of bravery would set into motion events that would change her life forever. For now, though, she simply returned to her diner, locking the door behind her and leaning against it for a moment. Her heart raced, not from fear, but from the adrenaline rush of standing up for what she believed was right. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new customers, and perhaps even a visit from the mysterious biker, whose path had crossed hers so unexpectedly. But for tonight, Marlene allowed herself a small smile, knowing she had done the right thing, even if it meant stepping into unfamiliar territory. The morning after the unexpected confrontation on the sidewalk, Marlene woke up with a mix of emotions swirling inside her. She replayed the events of the previous evening in her mind, the shouting, the tension, and the moment she stepped forward to defend Clayton. It wasn't every day that someone like her, a black woman running a small-town diner, found herself standing up for a member of the Hells Angels. The thought made her chuckle softly as she brewed her first cup of coffee for the day. "What have I gotten myself into?" she muttered to herself, though deep down she didn't regret it one bit. As the sun rose higher in the sky, casting golden light through the diner windows, Marlene opened Marlene's Corner for business. The usual crowd trickled in, local farmers grabbing breakfast before heading out to their fields, retirees sipping coffee while debating politics, and young families stopping by for pancakes. But today felt different. There was an undercurrent of curiosity in the air, whispers about what had happened the night before. Word traveled fast in a small town, and everyone seemed to know something about the standoff outside the diner. Around mid-morning, just as Marlene was refilling salt shakers behind the counter, the bell above the door jingled. She looked up to see Clayton walking in, his towering frame filling the doorway. He wore the same leather jacket from the night before, but this time, he carried no air of defiance or aggression. Instead, he looked almost hesitant, as if unsure how he'd be received. Marlene raised an eyebrow, setting down the salt shaker and crossing her arms. "Well, don't just stand there," she said, her tone firm but not unkind. "Come on in. You look like you could use some coffee." Clayton nodded gratefully and took a seat at the counter. Marlene poured him a steaming mug without asking, sliding it across the polished surface toward him. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. Clayton sipped his coffee slowly, glancing around the diner at the photos on the walls. Snapshots of Marlene's family, old customers, and community events over the years. Finally, he broke the silence. "I owe you," he said simply, his voice low and gravelly. "Last night, you didn't have to do what you did. Most people wouldn't have." Marlene shrugged, leaning against the counter. "Maybe not," she replied. "But I couldn't just stand there and watch something that didn't sit right with me. Doesn't matter who you are or where you come from. Nobody deserves to get roughed up without cause." Her words hung in the air between them, simple yet powerful. Clayton studied her face, searching for any hint of judgment or hesitation, but all he found was sincerity. In his world, trust was hard to come by, especially from outsiders. Yet here was Marlene treating him with the same respect she gave anyone else who walked into her diner. "You're not what I expected," Clayton admitted after a pause. "Most folks hear Hells Angels and run the other way." Marlene laughed softly, shaking her head. "I've been around long enough to know better than to judge someone based on labels. Besides, I saw the way you handled yourself last night. You weren't looking for trouble, you were trying to keep things calm." Clayton nodded, his expression softening. "That's fair. Still, I want you to know. I won't forget what you did. If there's ever anything you need, you let me know. My brothers and I, we take care of our own." Marlene waved off his offer casually, though part of her appreciated the gesture. "Like I told you last night, I didn't do it for you or your gang. I did it because it was the right thing to do. Don't go making promises you don't have to keep." Despite her dismissive tone, Clayton sensed there was more to Marlene than met the eye. Beneath her tough exterior lay a depth of compassion and conviction that intrigued him. Over the next hour, they talked openly about their lives. Clayton shared bits and pieces of his story. He'd served in the military before joining the Hells Angels, a decision driven by a desire for brotherhood and belonging. Life hadn't always been easy for him, and he carried scars both visible and invisible. Marlene listened intently, nodding occasionally but never interrupting. When it was her turn to speak, Marlene opened up about her own struggles. She told Clayton about growing up in the town, losing her parents early, and taking over the diner when she was barely in her 20s. Running a business as a black woman in a predominantly white community hadn't been easy, but she refused to let anyone push her around. Her strength and resilience reminded Clayton of the values he held dear within his own brotherhood: loyalty, honor, and standing up for what was right. By the end of their conversation, a mutual respect had formed between them. They came from vastly different worlds, yet they shared common ground in their commitment to fairness and justice. Before leaving, Clayton promised to visit again soon, saying, "You've got guts, Marlene. More than most people I know, and guts like that deserve respect." As the days passed, Clayton kept his word, stopping by the diner whenever he was in town. Each visit brought new stories and deeper connections. Marlene introduced him to her regular customers, many of whom were initially wary but eventually warmed up to him. Clayton in turn encouraged his fellow bikers to support the diner, spreading the word about Marlene's kindness and courage. Slowly but surely, Marlene's Corner became a sort of unofficial meeting place for members of the Hells Angels chapter, much to the surprise and occasional concern of the townsfolk. Yet despite the growing bond between Marlene and Clayton, neither of them anticipated the ripple effect their unlikely friendship would create. What started as a single act of bravery on Marlene's part was about to snowball into something far bigger than either of them could have imagined. For now, though, they focused on enjoying each other's company, finding comfort in the fact that sometimes doing the right thing can lead to the most unexpected friendships. The next morning, Marlene woke up earlier than usual, her mind still replaying snippets of her conversation with Clayton. She felt a strange mix of pride and unease, pride for standing by her principles, and unease about how the town might react to her growing connection with someone from the Hells Angels. "It's none of their business," she muttered to herself as she tied her apron around her waist. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to change in ways she hadn't anticipated. When she arrived at the diner, something felt off. The parking lot, usually filled with familiar cars and trucks, was eerily empty. At first, Marlene thought maybe it was just an unusually slow day, but as she unlocked the door and stepped inside, she noticed movement outside through the windows. Dozens of motorcycles lined the street, their chrome gleaming under the morning sun. Her heart skipped a beat. There had to be at least 200 of them, maybe more. Marlene froze for a moment, gripping the counter tightly. She recognized some of the bikers. They were part of Clayton's chapter, but many others were strangers. Their leather vests bore patches from chapters all over the region, each one a symbol of loyalty to the Hells Angels. For a split second, panic gripped her. What if they weren't here for friendly reasons? What if this was too much attention for her little diner, and her quiet town to handle? Before she could overthink it, the bell above the door jingled and Clayton walked in. He looked different today, not menacing but purposeful. Behind him trailed a few other bikers, including a tall, wiry man with sharp features who introduced himself as Raven, the vice president of Clayton's chapter. Marlene forced a smile, though her nerves were on edge. "Morning, Marlene," Clayton said, his voice calm but serious. "We need to talk." Marlene gestured toward the nearest booth and they sat down. The rest of the bikers lingered near the entrance, keeping an eye on the scene outside. Word had spread quickly among the townspeople and a small crowd had gathered across the street, whispering and pointing. Sheriff Daniels pulled up moments later, stepping out of his patrol car with a wary expression. He approached the diner cautiously, his hand resting on his holster. "What's going on here?" the sheriff demanded, his tone gruff but not aggressive. His eyes darted between Marlene and the sea of leather-clad men and women outside. Clayton stood up, his towering frame commanding attention. "Sheriff," he began, his voice steady and clear. "This is about respect. Last night, Marlene here did something brave, something honorable. She stood up when no one else would. That kind of courage deserves recognition." The sheriff frowned, glancing at Marlene. "I appreciate what you're saying, McAllister, but you bringing your whole crew into town isn't exactly helping matters." "It's not about causing trouble," Clayton replied firmly. "It's about showing solidarity. If anyone has a problem with Marlene, or with how we treat our friends, they'll answer to us." A murmur rippled through the crowd outside, and Marlene felt her cheeks flush. She wasn't used to being the center of attention like this, especially not in such dramatic fashion. Part of her wanted to tell Clayton to call off his brothers and sisters, to let things go back to normal. But another part of her, a deeper, quieter part, felt a surge of gratitude. These people who barely knew her were willing to stand up for her because of one act of kindness. It was overwhelming but also humbling. As the morning wore on, the tension eased slightly. Clayton invited Marlene to step outside and address the gathering. Reluctantly, she agreed, walking out onto the sidewalk with Clayton by her side. The sight of so many bikers standing shoulder to shoulder in silent support took her breath away. They weren't there to intimidate, they were there to protect. And for the first time, Marlene realized just how powerful that distinction was. "Listen up," Clayton called out, raising his hand to quiet the murmurs. When everyone turned their attention to him, he continued. "This woman right here, Marlene Johnson, proved last night that true strength comes from doing what's right even when it's hard. She didn't hesitate to step in when she saw injustice, and that's something we respect. So if anyone thinks they can mess with her or her diner, they'd better think again, because messing with her means messing with all of us." A cheer erupted from the crowd of bikers, loud enough to make the ground vibrate. Marlene blinked rapidly, trying to hold back tears. She wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry. This was far beyond anything she ever expected. As the cheering died down, she stepped forward, clearing her throat. "I didn't do what I did for recognition," she said, her voice trembling slightly but growing stronger with each word. "I did it because it was the right thing to do. I don't need anyone fighting my battles for me. I've been handling myself just fine for years. But I want to thank you all for standing with me today. It means more than I can put into words." Her speech earned another round of applause, this time joined by a few claps from the townsfolk watching nearby. Some of them looked unsure, while others seemed genuinely moved. Even Sheriff Daniels tipped his hat respectfully before heading back to his car, muttering something about keeping the peace. Inside the diner, chaos reigned supreme as the bikers poured in, filling every available seat. Marlene worked tirelessly alongside her staff, serving coffee, burgers, and pie to the hungry crowd. Tips flowed generously, and laughter echoed through the small space. Despite the initial shock, Marlene found herself enjoying the energy. These people weren't criminals or thugs. They were loyal, passionate, and fiercely protective of those they cared about. By the end of the day, Marlene's Corner had become something of a legend, not just in the town, but across the region. As evening fell and the last motorcycle rumbled away, Marlene leaned against the counter, exhausted but exhilarated. Clayton stayed behind to help clean up, and when they finally sat down together, she shook her head in disbelief. "You really know how to make an impression, don't you?" she teased, though her eyes sparkled with gratitude. Clayton grinned. "Just returning the favor, Marlene. You stood up for me when I needed it most. Now it's my turn to stand up for you." Though she tried to downplay the significance of the day, Marlene couldn't deny the impact it had left on her. Her little diner, once just a cozy corner of the community, had become a symbol of unity and defiance. And while she knew the road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, she also knew one thing for certain: she wasn't alone anymore. The days following the arrival of the Hells Angels were a whirlwind for Marlene in the town. News of the event spread like wildfire, not just locally, but across neighboring counties. People talked about it everywhere, in grocery stores, at gas stations, and even in church pews. Some saw Marlene as a hero, a woman who stood up against injustice and earned the loyalty of an entire biker gang. Others viewed her actions with suspicion, questioning why someone so deeply rooted in the community would align herself with a group often misunderstood and feared. For the townsfolk, opinions were divided. Longtime customers of Marlene's Corner continued to show up, their support unwavering. Many admired her courage and felt proud to know her. But there were also whispers, some subtle, others less so. A few local business owners began avoiding her, worried that associating too closely with Marlene might bring unwanted attention or trouble. The diner became a kind of battleground, not of violence, but of perception. Was Marlene a symbol of strength and unity, or was she inviting chaos into their quiet lives? Sheriff Daniels visited Marlene again a few days later, this time with a more personal tone. Sitting at one of the booths, he leaned forward, his hat resting on the table. "Marlene," he said, his voice low and serious, You've made some powerful friends. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but you live here. This is your home. Be careful. Marlene listened patiently, nodding as he spoke. She appreciated his concern, even if she didn't fully agree with it. I hear you, Sheriff, she replied calmly. But I didn't ask for any of this. All I did was what I thought was right. If people can't see that, then that's on them. Her response didn't satisfy everyone. Rumors swirled about potential fallout from the bikers' visit. Some feared retaliation from rival gangs or increased tension between law enforcement and the Hells Angels. Yet despite these concerns, Marlene refused to let fear dictate her life. She kept the diner open, welcoming everyone who walked through the door, bikers, locals, skeptics, and supporters alike. To her surprise, the influx of bikers brought unexpected benefits. Word of Marlene's bravery traveled far beyond the town limits, drawing curious visitors eager to meet the woman who had won the respect of the Hells Angels. Tourists stopped by to take photos, buy meals, and leave generous tips. Business boomed, and Marlene found herself hiring extra staff to keep up with demand. Her little diner transformed into a bustling hub of activity, filled with laughter, stories, and camaraderie. Still, not everyone was pleased. A handful of residents organized meetings to discuss the situation, debating whether the town should distance itself from Marlene and her newfound allies. At one such gathering, tempers flared. Some argued that Marlene's actions had put the town at risk, while others defended her, pointing out that she had done nothing wrong. One elderly man, a retired teacher named Mr. Hargrove, stood up and silenced the room with his words. Marlene Johnson has lived here longer than most of us, he said, his voice steady and firm. She's worked hard, paid her taxes, and given back to this community every chance she got. Now, when she does something brave, we're going to turn our backs on her? That's not how we treat our neighbors, not in my book. His speech struck a chord, shifting the conversation. Slowly but surely, even those who had been hesitant began to reconsider their stance. They realized that Marlene hadn't changed. She was still the same strong, principled woman they'd always known. What had changed was the spotlight shining on her, and perhaps their own fears of the unknown. Meanwhile, Marlene faced challenges of her own. Managing the sudden surge in customers was exhausting, but it wasn't the only issue. Local officials started paying closer attention to her diner, likely hoping to find some reason to shut down the growing spectacle. Health inspectors arrived, unannounced, scrutinizing every corner of the kitchen. Zoning officers questioned whether the parking lot could accommodate so many motorcycles. Each visit felt like a test, but Marlene handled them all with grace and professionalism. She knew they weren't really concerned about safety. They were looking for excuses to push back against the changes sweeping through the town. Clayton and his brothers noticed the pressure Marlene was under and offered to intervene, but she declined. "This is my fight," she told him firmly. "I don't need anyone else stepping in for me. Let me handle it my way." Her determination only deepened Clayton's admiration for her. He respected her independence, even if it meant biting his tongue when he wanted to step in. Instead, he encouraged his fellow bikers to continue supporting her in quieter ways, visiting the diner regularly, tipping generously, and spreading positive word of mouth about her business. Their presence alone served as a reminder to anyone considering causing trouble that Marlene had powerful allies. Over time, the initial shock of the bikers' arrival began to fade. The townspeople adapted, realizing that life in their small community hadn't fundamentally changed. Crime rates remained low, and the Hells Angels who visited treated everyone with courtesy and respect. Even Sheriff Daniels softened his stance, acknowledging privately that Marlene's actions had sparked something unique, a sense of unity between two groups that might never have interacted otherwise. As weeks turned into months, Marlene noticed a shift in the atmosphere. Skeptics warmed up to her, inspired by her resilience and leadership. Regulars returned, bringing friends and family to experience the magic of Marlene's Corner. The diner became more than just a place to eat. It became a symbol of courage and connection, proof that doing the right thing could bridge divides and bring people together. One evening, as Marlene locked up after another busy day, Clayton approached her. "You've done good, Marlene," he said, his voice filled with pride. "Not just for yourself, but for this whole town." She smiled, leaning against the doorframe. "It wasn't just me, Clayton. It was all of us. Together." And for the first time in a long while, Marlene felt truly at peace. Despite the challenges, she had stayed true to herself, and in doing so, had created something extraordinary. Months had passed since the day 200 Hells Angels rolled into town, and life in Marlene's small Midwest community had settled into a new rhythm. The diner buzzed with activity, drawing not only locals but also curious travelers eager to catch a glimpse of the woman who had earned the loyalty of an infamous biker gang. Marlene handled it all with her usual grace, though she couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing beneath the surface. Her instincts had always been sharp, and now they whispered warnings she couldn't ignore. One crisp autumn morning, as Marlene unlocked the diner's front door, she noticed fresh graffiti scrawled across the brick wall outside. The words, "Watch Your Back," were painted in jagged red letters, stark against the pale gray bricks. Marlene's stomach tightened, but she forced herself to stay calm. She called Sheriff Daniels immediately, who arrived within minutes, his face grim as he examined the vandalism. "This isn't random," he said, shaking his head. "It's a message." Marlene crossed her arms, her jaw set firmly. "A message from whom?" Daniels hesitated before answering. "There's been talk about rival gangs getting restless. They don't like what happened here. The show of force. By the Hells Angels. Some see it as a challenge." Marlene sighed deeply, leaning against the doorway. She hadn't asked for any of this drama, but she knew running away or backing down wasn't an option. "Well, they can send all the messages they want," she said evenly. "I'm not going anywhere." The sheriff nodded, impressed by her resolve. "Just be careful, Marlene. These people play rough." As word of the vandalism spread, tension rippled through the town. Customers began avoiding the diner out of fear, and even some longtime regulars stayed away, worried about being caught in the crossfire. Marlene watched as her once thriving business slowed to a trickle, her heart heavy with frustration. But she refused to let despair take hold. Instead, she doubled down on her determination to protect her corner of the world. Clayton and his brothers quickly caught wind of the threats. Within hours, several members of the Hells Angels chapter showed up at the diner, their presence both reassuring and intimidating. Clayton pulled Marlene aside, his expression serious. "We'll keep watch," he promised. "Nobody gets near you or this place without us knowing." Marlene appreciated the gesture but shook her head firmly. "I won't have you turning my diner into a fortress, Clayton. This is still my home, and I won't live in fear." Her words struck a chord with Clayton, who respected her strength even as he worried about her safety. Together, they came up with a compromise. The bikers would patrol the area discreetly, keeping an eye out for trouble without drawing unnecessary attention. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it eased some of the tension. For now. Determined to reclaim control of the situation, Marlene decided to take matters into her own hands. She organized a community meeting at the local church hall, inviting everyone, supporters, skeptics, and even those who had distanced themselves after the bikers' arrival. The turnout was better than she expected, filling the room with a mix of familiar faces and cautious newcomers. Standing at the front of the hall, Marlene addressed the crowd with quiet confidence. "I know there's been a lot of talk lately," she began, her voice steady. "Some of you are scared, and I get that. But let me make one thing clear. I'm not going anywhere. This diner has been part of this town for decades, and I won't let anyone chase me out because of threats or rumors." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "What happened here? With the bikers showing up? It wasn't about making trouble. It was about standing up for what's right. And if we want to move forward, we need to do it together. Not as separate groups, but as a community." Her speech resonated deeply, sparking a lively discussion among the attendees. For the first time in weeks, people talked openly about their fears and hopes, sharing ideas on how to address the growing tension. A young mother suggested organizing neighborhood patrols, while an older man proposed installing additional streetlights to deter vandalism. Even those who had initially opposed Marlene chimed in, offering practical solutions rather than criticism. Inspired by the unity in the room, Marlene proposed hosting a community event, a Harmony Day festival, to bring everyone together. The idea was met with enthusiasm, and volunteers eagerly signed up to help plan it. Flyers went up around town advertising food stalls, live music, and activities for kids. The goal was simple, to remind everyone that, despite their differences, they were stronger when they stood side by side. As preparations for Harmony Day got underway, tensions remained high. More incidents occurred. Broken windows at nearby shops slashed tires on parked cars. But the community responded with resilience. Neighbors looked out for each other, reporting suspicious activity and working together to clean up damage. The Hells Angels played a subtle yet crucial role, using their network to gather intelligence on the rival gang responsible for the attacks. They shared what they learned with Sheriff Daniels, who coordinated efforts to track down the perpetrators. Finally, the day of the festival arrived. The streets were lined with colorful booths, and the air buzzed with excitement. Families strolled hand in hand, children laughed as they played games, and local musicians performed on a makeshift stage. At the center of it all stood Marlene's corner, transformed into a bustling hub of activity. Bikers mingled with townsfolk, sharing stories and laughter over plates of Marlene's famous apple pie. For a brief moment, it felt like the troubles plaguing the town had faded into the background. But Marlene knew better than to let her guard down completely. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the festivities, she spotted Clayton standing near the edge of the crowd, watching protectively. She walked over to him, her expression softening. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything." Clayton smiled, tipping his head slightly. "You're the one holding this place together, Marlene. We're just helping where we can." Her gaze swept over the scene, taking in the diverse faces of her neighbors, all united, if only for a day. "No," she replied firmly. "This is all of us. Together." Though challenges still lay ahead, Marlene felt a renewed sense of hope. By standing firm in her convictions and bringing people together, she had proven that courage and unity could overcome even the toughest obstacles. And as the festival wound down, leaving behind memories of laughter and connection, she knew the town was stronger for it. Years passed, and the events surrounding Marlene's Corner became part of local legend, a story told with pride by those who lived through it. The diner itself transformed into more than just a place to grab a meal. It became a symbol of resilience, unity, and the power of standing up for what's right. Marlene's bravery had sparked something extraordinary in the small Midwest town, leaving an indelible mark on everyone she touched. The annual Harmony Day festival grew into a beloved tradition, drawing visitors from neighboring towns and cities. What started as a small community event evolved into a celebration of diversity and cooperation, featuring live music, art exhibits, and food stalls representing cultures from across the region. Each year, the festival opened with a speech from Marlene, who reminded attendees of the importance of coming together despite their differences. Her words carried weight because they were rooted in experience. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and even hostility, yet emerged stronger with the support of her community. Clayton and the Hells Angels remained steadfast allies, though their presence shifted from protective guardianship to active participants in the town's life. Members of the chapter volunteered at local charities, mentored troubled youth, and helped organize events like Harmony Day. They weren't just outsiders anymore. They were neighbors. Some even opened businesses in town, contributing to its economic growth while earning respect for their hard work and integrity. For Marlene, the changes brought both joy and reflection. She watched as old prejudices faded, replaced by understanding and mutual respect. People who once shied away from associating with bikers now greeted them warmly, knowing firsthand that labels didn't define character. Even Sheriff Daniels admitted privately that he'd misjudged the Hells Angels, acknowledging their role in fostering peace rather than chaos. Yet, Marlene never forgot the challenges she'd faced. or the sacrifices made along the way. There were moments when doubt crept in, nights spent lying awake, wondering if she'd done enough to protect her town. But every morning, as she unlocked the diner's door and smelled the comforting aroma of coffee brewing, she found reassurance in the simple act of continuing forward. Life wasn't perfect, but it was better because people chose to stand together instead of apart. One crisp spring morning, several years after the initial standoff, Marlene received an unexpected visitor. A young woman named Emily walked into the diner, her hands trembling slightly as she approached the counter. She introduced herself as the daughter of one of the rival gang members who had targeted Marlene's diner years earlier. Emily explained that her father had recently passed away, leaving behind letters expressing regret for his actions and admiration for Marlene's courage. "He always said you were different," Emily said softly, her voice thick with emotion, "that you didn't back down no matter what. He wished he could have been more like you." Marlene listened intently, her heart swelling with compassion. She reached across the counter, placing a gentle hand on Emily's shoulder. "Your father made mistakes, but so do we all," she replied kindly. "What matters is how we choose to move forward. If you're here today wanting to make things right, then that's all that counts." Emily nodded, tears streaming down her face. Over coffee, the two women talked openly about forgiveness, healing, and the importance of breaking cycles of hatred. By the end of the conversation, Emily promised to honor her father's memory by volunteering in the community and working toward positive change. It was a poignant reminder that even those on opposite sides of conflict could find common ground. As time went on, Marlene's influence extended beyond the town itself. Journalists and filmmakers visited Marlene's corner, eager to document her story. Documentaries aired on television, and articles appeared in national magazines highlighting how one woman's courage had inspired an entire community. Marlene handled the attention with humility, deflecting praise onto others and emphasizing the collective effort that had made everything possible. Her legacy also inspired younger generations. High school students began organizing projects focused on social justice, using Marlene's story as a blueprint for action. Teachers incorporated her tale into lesson plans, teaching students about moral courage and the impact of individual choices. One student, inspired by Marlene's determination, went on to study law, vowing to fight for fairness and equality in the courtroom. Despite the accolades and recognition, Marlene stayed grounded, focusing on what mattered most: her family, her friends, and her diner. She continued serving meals with the same warmth and care she always had, treating each customer as if they were part of her extended family. On quiet afternoons, she sat at a corner table, sipping tea and flipping through photo albums filled with memories from over the years. Pictures of Clayton and his brothers smiling broadly at Harmony Day festivals, snapshots of customers turned friends, celebrating milestones big and small, and countless images of her own loved ones, whose unwavering support had carried her through the toughest times. When asked about her secret to resilience, Marlene often smiled and shrugged. "I didn't do anything special," she'd say. "I just did what I thought was right even when it was hard. Sometimes that's all it takes." But those who knew her understood that her strength came not only from conviction, but also from love, for her community, for justice, and for the belief that ordinary people could achieve extraordinary things when they worked together. Marlene Johnson wasn't a superhero or a celebrity. She was simply a woman who stood firm in her values, inspiring others to do the same. And so, Marlene's Corner remained a cornerstone of the town, a place where laughter echoed, stories unfolded, and lives intertwined. Its walls bore witness to acts of kindness, moments of triumph, and lessons learned. Through it all, Marlene stood at the heart of it, reminding everyone who entered that true strength lies not in brute force or intimidation, but in compassion, integrity, and the courage to stand up for what's right, even when the odds seem insurmountable. Her story served as a beacon of hope, proving that no matter how divided the world might feel, there will always be opportunities to bridge gaps, mend wounds, and create connections. For Marlene, the journey had been long and challenging, but it had also been deeply rewarding. And, as she looked around her bustling diner, surrounded by faces young and old, familiar and new, she knew one thing for certain. She had made a difference, and that was worth everything.